際の流れの中にいて、私を攻撃できた者もかつて誰一人としていない。
Wonder of You. You all know him, you all love him, and hopefully you're not pursuing him. For some who don't know, Wonder of You is a stand introduced within the pages of Jojolion and has quickly cemented itself into the minds of readers. This is in part due to their drip, an ability to control Calamity. Calamity is a power that pretty much controls every aspect of the Jojo multiverse, and has skyrocketed Wonder of You and Tooru to the top of their respective verse. However, as I was thinking about the concept of Calamity, I couldn't help but think about another anime universe, whose cast of characters have to fight their own calamities every day. I'm of course talking about the world of Jujutsu Kaisen, a universe in which every person is on death's door, and only the abandonment of one's humanity can truly lead to the realm of the strongest. But that got me thinking, what would happen if Tooru and Wonder of You were forced to follow the rules of the Jujutsu Kaisen universe? What if every character within JJK pursued Tooru at the same time? Could logic and reason save them? Let's answer the question of if Wonder of You can solo the entire JJK universe. The Wonder of You would be a cursed spirit, special grade and power. In the world of Jujutsu Kaisen, curses are formed through the combination of negative emotions. These negative emotions can be formed through anything or anywhere, such as your workplace, hospitals, math, or a Kori Kenshin hiatus. Cursed spirits like Dagon were formed through the negative emotions related to the unknowns of the ocean, and Mahito is formed through the negative emotions related to humans and the capacity for evil they have. With that said, what kind of negative emotions would form the Wonder of You? Well, let's think back to what he represents. Wonder of You is the physical manifestation of Calamity. Calamity is an event causing sudden damage or distress in our day-to-day lives. Perhaps it's a traffic accident or flash flood. Wonder of You would basically be formed through these negative emotions and fear one would have towards these sudden and random dangerous incidents, no matter how big or small. Since Wonder of You would be formed similarly to the disaster curses, he'd be hyper-intelligent, able to communicate with others and make decisions on his own. But how would we explain Tooru's connection to Wonder of You? Well, in the JJK world, Tooru would in fact be a Jujutsu sorcerer that would somehow have ties to Wonder of You. Maybe he'd be a vessel like Yuji, or perhaps he'd be cursed like Yuta, but I like the idea that they came to a mutual agreement and formed a contract of sorts. A contract that would require Wonder of You to protect Tooru in exchange for something like cash or perhaps chaos and destruction. Now that we've explained Wonder of You within the world of JJK, how'd they fare against the universe's best fighters? Let's first pit them up against the more physical commands, like Yuji, Maki, and Toji. When it comes to physical fighters, they stand zero chance of even putting up a decent fight. First of all, since all these fighters heavily rely on close quarters combat, they would be unable to even get within 40 meters of Wonder of You. Calamity would make sure that they never reach him. The only thing they have at their advantage is their sheer superhuman strength, speed, and sheer skill. When it comes to durability, we've seen that all three characters have tanked explosive amounts of damage. Yuji has been blown through several buildings, Maki has survived being hit directly by Naya's curse, who can move at speeds of Mach 5, and Toji has survived being violently blasted away by Gojo's red. The reaction time of these characters are immense, being able to react quickly to even faster than bullet attacks. Now if the Wonder of You did go after them, it's quite likely that they'd be able to survive or even dodge most of the calamities sent their way, at least for a while, but it's unlikely they'd ever close the distance. Their physical feats are impressive, but they'd only really last a couple minutes against Wonder of You. 2 out of the 3 characters have received life-threatening injuries after all, so it's not entirely impossible to kill them. And since Calamity operates under completely unfair rules, eventually they will encounter a Calamity that can manage to kill them or at least knock them unconscious. This applies to physical fighters with cursed techniques as well, such as Todo and Nanami. Nanami's ratio technique can cause a great deal of damage, but it's unlikely to ever get close to Wonder of You. Boogie Woogie may allow Todo to avoid some calamities coming his way, but there's a high chance that he'd teleport right in front of another calamity. A lot of the time, Calamity can use their own skills or weapons against them. How about powerful curse techniques we've seen throughout the series, like the 10 Shadows, Curse Speech, and Blood Manipulation? With the 10 Shadows, Megumi definitely has a lot of options at his disposal when attempting to close in on Wonder of You. He can use Rapid Escape to distract the stand, Max Elephant to cover an entire area full of water, or hide in his shadow in an attempt to close the distance or prepare surprise attacks. But these Shikigami may actually be at a disadvantage for Megumi. Why, you ask? Well, let's not forget that Calamity can take control of an individual's power for a brief period in order to hurt their opponents. Calamity can easily make it so Megami gets hit or attacked by his own Shikigami. Curse speech can do a variety of things once his user says certain keywords. He could try to say blast away for example, in order to make Wonder Review get launched. But remember the drawbacks a user gets when saying powerful words like this. Without Calamity has been shown to take advantage of physical conditions, it could easily make it so Curse speech's user chokes on their own blood, or perhaps they never get to say anything at all. Techniques with one-shot potential like blood manipulation and Kashimo's technique can easily be redirected back to their user. Not only do they need a line of sight of Wonder Review, but the attacks still follow the flow of logic. Something would definitely occur to block or redirect the attacks. A defensive technique like Love Rendezvous may be a little useful, but that would require them to know what objects will cause a calamity, since their user is required to mark their desired objects with stars. Even if Wonder Review is marked, they would still get attacked by Calamity. Takaba's curse technique could strangely be a hard counter to Calamity. Basically, anything Takaba finds funny will manifest into reality, like when his skin suddenly was coated in a slippery substance, making an opponent's attacks slide off them. So if you found the idea of Tooru slipping on a banana peel funny, it could happen. This ability has also been implied to bypass Gojo's limitless technique. Theoretically, Takaba could avoid getting hurt by Calamity if he found said Calamity funny in some way, and could potentially bypass the Calamity shield itself. But the thing about Calamity is that it's extremely random and deadly. Takaba's curse technique may help him survive Calamity for some time, but eventually his comedic genius would run out. For those that may potentially bring up cursed energy nullifying tools or techniques, it's likely that Calamity would either knock these tools away or use it against them and prevent any technique's activation. Curses like Moito, Jojo, and Hanami simply stand no chance. Most of their powers use the destructive elements of our world, such as volcanoes. These elements are intrinsically tied to the logic of the world, and would thus be under Wonder Review's control. Jojo would unfortunately take another L. Moito functions a little differently with the manipulation of his soul, as he can easily tank most calamities, but even the soul functions under logic and reason. Calamity would find some way to attack Moito's soul itself, maybe with a cursed tool or individual who has been stated to be able to do so. Rika is a cursed spirit known for her boundless cursed energy, and this gives her increased strength, speed, and a laser blast capable of rivaling the maximum Uzumaki. Rika has other abilities such as storing curse techniques and tools, but only Yuta can fully utilize this part of her ability. On her own, Rika is a formidable combatant, but she's unfortunately showcased nothing that can stand up to Wonder Review's Calamity. She isn't exactly the most invincible curse out there, so hitting her with a massive calamity would be enough to take her out. Finally, how would Wonder Review fare against the second strongest curse in the series, Mahoraga? Well, it's interesting because Mahoraga's ability is adapting to any and all phenomena. Once it's hit by any attack, the wheel on its head turns and then becomes immune to that attack. It will either deflect it or immediately heal. Even Sukuna was afraid that it may adapt to slashing techniques in general, which she was right and needed to use a secondary ability to almost immediately finish it off. With that said, would Mahoraga adapt to Calamity? It's an interesting question because Calamity represents everything within at least the cosmology of the JJK world. For Mahoraga to even attempt to adapt to Calamity would be saying that Mahoraga adapted to logic and reason itself, so things would go in two directions. Either Mahoraga has an immediate awareness of coming calamities and instantly prevents them, like when it deflected Sukuna's invisible slashing technique, or Wonder Review throws so many calamities at Mahoraga that it couldn't possibly survive the onslaught. Another option is pulling an ultimate cards and launching Mahoraga into space somehow with a calamity. Domain expansions are one of the most powerful technique a sorcerer possesses. It can be an insta-kill move in a lot of cases. With that said, it's unlikely anyone would pull off a domain expansion in conflict with Wonder Review. To activate a domain requires an individual to make some sort of hand sign. Theoretically, trapping Wonder Review in a domain would shut off Calamity. However, the act of trying to achieve a domain would count as pursuit, and Calamity would easily find a way to interrupt the domain's activation, maybe with a leaf or a random bystander. Hakari's domain would be the most interesting situation. If there was ever a time where he hit a jackpot, any calamity thrown his way would immediately be healed due to his immortality, but it's unlikely he'd ever close the distance towards Tooru, and Calamity could either make it so he never hits a jackpot, or the domain never activates in general. This also applies to the 0.2 second domains. Those still count as pursuits, and Calamity will prevent them from taking place in some way. With how I've been describing Wonder Review, he definitely seems to be special grade in power, so let's pit him up against the other special grades, shall we? First is Yuki Tsukumo. Basically, her curse technique allows her to add virtual mass to herself or her Shikigami. When that occurs, any attack she throws will do an unnatural amount of damage, and a single punch can send a certain individual flying. The mass she adds doesn't affect her speed, however, as she can keep moving at high speeds in any situation. Despite this ability to increase her mass, this wouldn't allow her to overcome Calamity. She'd in turn have no way to close the distance. Yuki could also attempt to use her black hole move, but even black holes follow the laws of logic, so Wonder of You would remain unharmed in some way. Kenjaku holds hundreds of thousands of curses within himself with curse spirit manipulation, and can release these curses anytime he pleases for a variety of tasks. These curses can range from the weakest of grade 3s to the strongest of special grades, but they're all useful in one way or another. However, Kenjaku runs into the same problem as Megami. With all these creatures at his disposal, they are vulnerable to being manipulated by Calamity, and can thus be used against him. Perhaps a mini Uzumaki blows a hole through him. Maybe one of his curses accidentally catches him in their domain. There are many unpredictable things that can occur. What about Yuta, the so-called second to Gojo in power? Well, we know he possesses a massive amounts of curse energy and multiple curse techniques. From the ones we've seen, they allow Yuta to go toe-to-toe with powerful sorcerers of the past. Not only that, he also has Rika by his side and reverse curse technique. All this is impressive, but they still wouldn't do much against Wonder of You and Calamity. I've already discussed how Rika wouldn't stand a chance, but none of Yuta's stored curse techniques would be very useful either. Curse speech runs into the same problems I've laid out before, and even if sky manipulation can redirect some calamities, that'll only really last a couple seconds. If Yuta attempts to power up Rika with love, that'll just get redirected.
It's not looking good for the JJK universe. Almost none of them can stand up to the multi-dimensional entity that is Wonder of You. But wait, we still have yet to make them face off against the honored ones, those that have become the strongest in the universe. Both Sukuna and Gojo are the pinnacles of the JJK world, Sukuna being an unstoppable force and Gojo being an immovable object. Sukuna can destroy anything with invisible slashing attacks, and Gojo is pretty much untouchable with his limitless barrier. Both parties' destructive capabilities can level entire cities, and they've been stated to be able to take on entire nations and win. But yet, the true honored ones in this situation is Wonder of You. Starting with Sukuna, he has absolutely nothing that can bypass the Wonder of You's Calamity. Since it's random and exists everywhere, anyone or anything will be used as a weapon against him. The slashing technique of Cleave and Dismantle, his fire technique, and even the 10 shadows can either be prevented by Calamity or redirected somewhere else. Most will bring up reverse curse technique and argue that Sukuna can power through calamities. But the thing about Calamity is that it can sometimes be nonsensical and take advantage of any situation. Perhaps Sukuna is unable to use it properly for some reason, or it just does not work at all. Sukuna would ultimately be defeated by Calamity that does more damage than it should, or he'd be trapped somewhere with no escape. Gojo would be the most interesting situation. First of all, the Limitless would seemingly protect him from all calamities. The Six Eyes would allow him to see some calamities coming, and Reverse Curse Technique would heal him from any calamity that makes contact. Well, that is true, but let's not forget how Gojo's barrier works. He uses a filter system that immediately stops anything deemed a threat and allows harmless things in, like water and air. Calamity controls every aspect of the world and makes them do more damage than usual. It can suddenly start raining, penetrating Gojo like bullets. A falling leaf can cut off his limbs, and even one of his students can bump into him, blowing a hole right through his chest. Remember that everything I've mentioned are things Gojo would normally let through his filter. The Six Eyes are useful, but calamities are far too random. Anything at any random moment can initiate calamity, even his own body. The concept of infinity is not illogical. It still follows the flow of logic and reason, and is thereby vulnerable to be controlled by calamity. Perhaps an attack Gojo expected to be stopped would pass through his barrier anyways. Calamity can deprive Gojo of air, which I'm pretty sure Reverse Curse Technique can't magically fix. If both Sukuna and Gojo attempt to open their domains, I've already established that it would be prevented in some way or even avoided by the Wonder of You. The cooldown period for when the domain ends would be guaranteed death for the so-called strongest, as they would be unable to use their techniques. However, Gojo does have something up his sleeve that can potentially bypass Calamity. I'm of course talking about Hollow Purple. It's been stated that it's an imaginary mass, which means that it technically does not exist and would thus be on the same realm as Soft and Wet go beyond. They even have the same ability to erase anything they touch. Theoretically, Purple should be able to bypass Calamity, but let's not forget that even with Go Beyond, Gappy still almost died attempting to stop the Wonder of You. His victory only really came down to luck. Hollow Purple requires Gojo to manually activate it with a hand sign, meaning that there's a stage in which it can be interrupted by Calamity.
So yeah, Wonder of You has achieved victory. The JJK universe is definitely formidable, possessing many fighters that can level cities and destroy anyone in their path, but against a threat as powerful and chaotic as Wonder of You, they mostly have nothing at their disposal that can stop him. Takaba, Maharaga, and Gojo stand the best chance, but even then, they still can't stand up to the overwhelming force of logic.